Can I take these two pieces of chicken home? I'm sorry, sir, she said quietly. I only asked because those two pieces are still untouched. Jonathan Whitmore paused, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. The young waitress standing beside his table looked barely old enough to be working there. She wore Maison Celeste's simple black uniform, carefully pressed, though the stitching at the cuffs had begun to fray. A silver name tag was pinned to her chest. Annie Brooks. Before Jonathan could answer, hurried footsteps crossed the dining room. No, absolutely not. Annie immediately went rigid. Gerald Pike, the restaurant manager, stopped beside her. His black suit was perfectly pressed, not a crease in sight, while the smile on his face was so forced it made the moment even more uncomfortable. Annie, step away from the table, he said. You know employees are not allowed to ask guests for food. I'm sorry, Mr. Pike. I only thought that since the food hadn't been touched, take the plate to the kitchen, then return to your section. Gerald reached for it, but Jonathan placed his hand on the edge of the plate first. I haven't said anything yet. Gerald stopped. Jonathan lowered his coffee cup to the table. What is wrong with you? You rush over here and make a decision for me before I even have the chance to speak. Are you managing this restaurant? Or are you deciding what I am allowed to say at my own table? Mr. Whitmore, I am simply trying to protect your dining experience. My dinner was perfectly fine until you humiliated this young woman in front of the entire room. The conversations at the nearby tables faded, then stopped altogether. Annie stared down at the carpet, her cheeks burning red with embarrassment. Gerald straightened his posture. We maintain certain standards here, sir. Sitting across from Jonathan, David slowly wiped his mouth with his napkin and placed it beside his plate. Then perhaps you should let the young woman explain what is happening herself. Annie placed her tray on the stand beside the table. She clasped her hands in front of her apron, squeezing so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Then she gestured softly toward Jonathan's plate, almost apologetically. Sir, she said, may I please have just those two pieces? I know I should not ask while you are still dining, but they are untouched. If you are finished, could I please take them home? David glanced down at the plate. Do you know how expensive those two pieces are? Annie blinked. No, sir. That dish costs nearly $40, David said. Free-range chicken, a special marinade, local honey, and whatever herbs Chef Celeste never stops talking about. Those two pieces alone are probably worth. David, that's enough. David fell silent. Jonathan frowned at him. She is asking about food I was about to leave, uneaten. She did not ask you for a lecture on the menu prices. David's expression softened immediately. He turned toward Annie. He's right. I'm sorry, Miss Brooks. That was inappropriate of me. Annie quickly shook her head. No, sir. I didn't know the meal was that expensive. I should never have asked. She started to take the plate away, then stopped. Her eyes drifted back to the two untouched pieces of chicken. She swallowed hard and looked away again, as if even wanting the food had become one more thing to be ashamed of. Jonathan noticed. You still want to take them home, don't you? Annie glanced quickly at Gerald, then back at Jonathan. Yes, sir, she whispered. Please, who are they for? My younger brother. His name is Noah. He's 15, and he gets sick a lot. He hasn't been feeling well today. Has he eaten anything? Annie tightened her hands again. I left him some toast this morning. There was a little soup left from yesterday. Noah texted that he was fine, but he always says that when he doesn't want me to worry. The pocket of her apron suddenly vibrated. Annie looked down instinctively. Before she could turn off the screen, Jonathan saw the message glowing on her phone. Don't worry, just finish your shift. I'm okay. She quickly put the phone away. I promised I would bring him something, she said softly. Jonathan looked at the plate in front of him, then around the elegant dining room, where crystal wine glasses sparkled beneath warm golden lights and expensive food remained unfinished on more than one table. Why don't you buy him something after your shift? Annie lowered her head further. I don't have any money tonight, sir. But you work here. Yes, sir. You still haven't been paid? Annie did not answer. Jonathan leaned forward. How late is your paycheck? 2 weeks, sir. David immediately sat up straighter. Beside Annie, Gerald's face tightened visibly. Annie began speaking quickly, as though she feared her last chance would disappear if she did not get the words out fast enough. Sir, if you let me take the chicken home, I'll work extra hours tonight. I can clean another section after the restaurant closes. I can come in early tomorrow too. When I finally receive my paycheck, they can deduct the cost of the meal from it. They can deduct more than that if necessary. Her voice caught. I just need to bring something home for Noah tonight. A young woman who had already worked an entire shift was offering the labor of tomorrow in exchange for 2 pieces of food Jonathan had already decided not to eat. Jonathan slowly turned toward Gerald. She says her pay has been delayed for 2 weeks. What does that mean? Gerald cleared his throat. There has been a temporary payroll issue involving 1 employee. The matter is being corrected. 1 employee? Jonathan asked. You mean Miss Brooks is the only person in this restaurant who has not been paid? Gerald glanced toward the reception desk. I would need to review the records before answering that question accurately. No, Jonathan said, his voice turning cold. You need to review the records before giving me exact numbers. But you already know whether this has happened to anyone else. For the first time, Gerald had nothing to say. A waitress carrying a water pitcher stopped near the next table. She appeared to be in her 30s, with tired eyes and a plain wedding ring on her hand. Sir, she said carefully, Annie is not the only one. Gerald spun toward her. Maria, return to your section immediately. Jonathan raised one hand. Let her speak. Maria swallowed hard. My paycheck last month was late too. I still had enough savings to buy groceries for my family that week, so I did not say anything. A young male server standing nearby stepped forward as well, twisting a towel between his hands. Mine was delayed too, Mr. Whyℎmore. I still live with my parents, so I'm all right for now. But Annie. He looked toward the girl standing motionless beside the table. She doesn't have anyone helping her pay the bills. From near the kitchen door, another employee spoke up. We were told the problem would be fixed soon. Everyone was afraid that if we complained, our shifts would be cut. Gerald's voice grew sharp. This is not the place for employees to discuss workplace matters. Jonathan looked directly at him. You are right. This never should have reached the dining room. He paused, his gaze turning icy. It should have been resolved before any of these people had to stand here wondering where their wages had gone. Gerald went pale. Jonathan turned back to Annie. You do not have to work 1 additional minute to earn the food on my plate. Annie's face fell. She thought he was refusing her. Yes, sir, I understand. No, Miss Brooks, you don't. Jonathan gently pushed the plate toward her. Take those 2 pieces of chicken home to your brother, and have the kitchen pack a full dinner for both of you. Annie's head shot up. But I can't afford to pay for that. You will not be charged. Then Jonathan turned toward Gerald. Before I leave here tonight, I want to see the complete payroll records for every employee in this restaurant. Gerald was barely able to maintain his composure. Mrs. Whyℎmore oversees the operations here directly. I will need to call her. Then call my wife, Jonathan said, after you bring me those records. Annie remained beside the table, motionless, as though she still did not quite believe she was truly allowed to take the food. Jonathan's voice softened. Go ahead, Miss Brooks. Annie looked at him. He nodded toward the plate. Noah has waited long enough. Annie's hands trembled as she lifted the plate from the table. The 2 pieces of chicken were still untouched, still warm, and to her younger brother that night, they were worth more than any lavish feast in that dining room. Gerald Pike stood at the end of Jonathan's table, his expression so grave that the folder in his hand seemed to weigh more than an ordinary stack of papers ever could. Jonathan took the folder from him without inviting him to sit down. A few steps away, Annie remained frozen in place, still holding the plate with 2 nearly untouched pieces of fried chicken. She should have been taking them to the kitchen to have them packed up for Noah. But from the moment the unpaid wages had been mentioned, she had stood there motionless, unsure whether she should leave or stay. Gerald cleared his throat. This is only a preliminary list, Mr. Whyℎmore. The accounting department has already closed for the evening. Jonathan opened the folder. At the top of the page were the words, pending disbursement. Below them were 19 names. Annie Brooks was first on the list. Beneath hers were Maria Alvarez, Andre Bennett, Denise Holloway, Calvin Rhodes, and 14 others. Jonathan slowly raised his head. 19 employees? Gerald adjusted his tie. The restaurant is currently experiencing some temporary cash flow difficulties. Across the table, David gave a low whistle. Temporary cash flow difficulties, he repeated, his voice heavy with sarcasm. That is a very polished way of saying you expect people to keep working after you have stopped paying them. Gerald turned toward David. This sort of thing is not unheard of in the restaurant business. Jonathan snapped the folder shut. The fact that it happens elsewhere does not make it acceptable here. Gerald fell silent for a moment. then said, "Sir, I am certain Mrs. Whitmore can explain the situation better than I can." "Then call my wife." Gerald blinked. "Tonight, sir?" Jonathan rose from his chair. "Yes, tonight. Call Celeste and tell her to come here immediately." The piano music continued to drift through the elegant dining room, but several nearby guests had stopped pretending not to listen. A few of them turned discreetly toward the table. Jonathan no longer cared. Gerald lowered his voice. "Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Whitmore may be occupied with a personal engagement. Perhaps tomorrow morning would be more convenient." Jonathan brought his palm down hard on the table. The blow was not forceful enough to overturn a glass or disturb a plate, but it was enough to make Gerald flinch and send the dining room into sudden silence for several seconds. "I told you to call my wife and tell her to come to this restaurant immediately." Jonathan's voice was low, but razor sharp. "There are 19 people working in an establishment that bears her name who have not been paid for their labor. She can leave whatever party she is attending and explain that to me herself." Annie startled at the anger in his voice. Jonathan noticed the fear in her eyes and forced himself to rein in the harshness in his expression before turning back to Gerald. "Go make the call." Gerald lowered his head. "Yes, sir." He turned quickly and almost hurried toward the office at the back of the restaurant. David picked up his wine glass, slowly swirled the liquid inside, then set it back down without taking a sip. "I have to admit, John," he said, "your wife has created quite a memorable place here." Jonathan looked at him. "Not now, David. On the contrary, I think now is exactly the right time." David nodded toward the kitchen. "You brought me here to admire Celeste's restaurant. Beautiful dining room. Excellent pianist. Very good chicken. The only puzzling detail is that the people serving it do not seem to know whether they will ever be paid for the hours they have worked." Jonathan clenched his jaw. "Do you think I knew about this?" David looked directly at his friend. "I think you have grown very comfortable not needing to know." Jonathan said nothing. David continued, his tone still dry, though his eyes held no trace of humor now. "How does the wife of Jonathan Whitmore end up owing restaurant employees their wages while the two of you host lavish charity dinners and order $40 fried chicken? That is not a small bookkeeping error. That is a question someone should have asked before an 18-year-old girl had to beg to take home the food you were about to leave behind." The words struck Jonathan harder than he wanted to admit. Annie timidly stepped closer to the table, the plate still in her hands. "Mr. Whitmore, please don't do this. I never meant to cause trouble between you and your wife." Jonathan turned toward her. "Miss Brooks, you did not cause any trouble. I only asked to take home 2 pieces of chicken, and you should never have been put in a position where you had to ask." Annie lowered her head. "Mr. Pike told us everything would be taken care of soon." "Us?" David asked gently. "Do you know of other employees who are also waiting to be paid?" Annie shook her head slightly. "Not everyone. Maria mentioned that her paycheck was late, but her husband still has a job. Andre lives with his parents. I thought, maybe I was the only one who couldn't afford to wait any longer." From the service counter nearby, Maria slowly approached their table. She still held a water pitcher in one hand, but her attention was no longer on the guests in the dining room. "You are not the only one," Maria said. Annie turned toward her. "Maria?" Maria set the pitcher on the edge of the table. "My rent was paid this month only because my husband got overtime. Otherwise, I would be in the same position as you." She looked at Jonathan, her voice cautious but clear. "Mr. Pike told us our wages would be paid last Friday. Then, on Friday, he said we would have to wait until Monday. On Monday, he told us not to bring our personal financial problems into the workplace." A young busboy named Andre stepped forward next, anxiety written all over his face. "I was told I should be grateful I still had shifts," he said. "I was afraid to complain because I didn't want to lose my job." Another waitress stopped beside the empty table near them. Denise had to borrow money from her sister to pay for childcare. She was too embarrassed to say anything in front of the guests. Jonathan opened the folder again. The names on the page no longer looked like impersonal entries in a report. Now, each name had a face. Rent money, child care money, grocery money, medicine money, bus fare home through the snow. And somewhere in the city, there were probably children waiting for a mother or an older sister to come home with a dinner she had worked to provide, yet still could not afford to buy. Annie carefully placed the plate back on the table. "Sir, if this is going to cause problems for the restaurant, I can finish my shift tonight. I can also pay for the chicken once I receive my paycheck." Jonathan turned toward her so quickly that she immediately stopped speaking. No. His voice was firm. You will not work one more hour tonight in exchange for food I was going to leave behind. But Noah, your brother is going to have dinner, Jonathan said, and so are you. Annie immediately shook her head. I cannot accept a full meal without paying for it. David leaned toward her. Annie, look at me. Jonathan ordered that dinner. He paid for it. If he wants to send what is left home with you and your brother, that is his decision. It is not charity from this restaurant. Annie considered his words in silence, though hesitation still remained in her eyes. Jonathan turned toward a woman in a chef's coat standing near the kitchen entrance. Please pack up this chicken and prepare enough hot food for Miss Brooks and her brother to have dinner tonight. Annie opened her mouth to object again, but Jonathan raised a hand to stop her. No deductions from your wages, no extra shift in exchange, no debt. His voice softened as he looked at her. You are going to take dinner home to your brother, and I am going to find out why you have worked here for 3 weeks without being paid. Annie's eyes filled with tears. She blinked rapidly, trying to keep them from falling. Thank you, sir. Jonathan looked at her for a long moment. Do not thank me for noticing far too late. If Annie and Noah's story touched your heart, please like this video, comment where you are watching from, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of kindness, dignity, and justice. Just then, Gerald returned from the office, still clutching the phone tightly in his hand. Well? Jonathan asked. I managed to reach Mrs. Whitmore's assistant, Gerald replied. She said Mrs. Whitmore is attending the Lakeshore Winter Benefit and cannot be disturbed until... Jonathan walked directly toward him. Give me the phone. Gerald handed it over at once. Jonathan found his wife's number and called. Celeste did not answer. He called again. Still no answer. This time, he left a message. Celeste, this is Jonathan. Leave the benefit and come to Maison Celeste immediately. 19 of your employees have not been paid, and I am holding a list of their names in my hand. His voice remained controlled, but the entire restaurant seemed able to feel the fury beneath it. If you are not here within 1 hour, my next calls will be to our auditors and our attorneys, and then you will explain the missing wages without me standing between you and the questions that need to be answered. Jonathan ended the call and handed the phone back to Gerald. David tilted his head. That may be the first sincere invitation she has received all party season. Jonathan gave him a warning look. David rose from his chair. You can be angry with me later. Right now, we need to make sure no one touches those records before your wife gets here. Jonathan nodded, then turned to Gerald. You will preserve every payroll record, work schedule, email, and payment authorization from the past 6 months. Not one employee who speaks up tonight is to have their hours cut, be fired, or receive any form of disciplinary action. He stepped closer to Gerald. Put that in writing before I leave this building. Gerald's face went pale. Yes, sir. The chef returned carrying a large paper bag, its top neatly folded over. Warmth from the food inside still radiated through the paper. Annie accepted it with both hands and held it close against her thin uniform. May I go home now, sir? She asked. Jonathan looked toward the windows. Outside, the snow had begun to fall more heavily, covering the sidewalk beneath the streetlights. My driver will take you home. Annie quickly shook her head. I can take the bus. Not tonight. She hesitated for a moment, then gave a small nod. Only because Noah is waiting for me. Jonathan took the folder containing the 19 names and slipped it inside his coat. Yes, he said quietly. And because that boy has waited long enough. The black sedan pulled away from the curb behind Maison Celeste with Annie sitting stiffly in the back seat, the paper bag balanced across her knees. Warmth seeped through the folded top and into her cold hands. She could smell the chicken, mashed potatoes, greens and soup each time the car turned, and every few blocks she checked the bag as if someone might change their mind and ask for it back. Jonathan sat across from her in the rear-facing seat. David had insisted on coming along, saying he did not trust himself to stay in the restaurant without questioning every manager and bookkeeper in the building. Now he sat beside Jonathan, looking through the list of unpaid employees beneath the glow of the overhead light. 19, David said again, quieter this time. And that is only the preliminary page. Annie lowered her eyes. I didn't know it was that many. You were not supposed to know, Jonathan said. You were supposed to receive your wages on time. She did not answer. Through the window, the decorated storefronts of Gold Coast gave way to narrower streets. Corner laundromats, small carry-out restaurants and apartment buildings, with old brick darkened by snow. Annie watched the change, with an uneasiness Jonathan recognized. She was not ashamed of where she lived. She was worried about what he would think of it. Her phone vibrated again. She opened the message quickly. "You almost done? I found crackers. Don't bring anything if it's too late." Annie typed with both thumbs. "I'm coming now. I have dinner." A reply appeared within seconds. "You sure?" She looked down at the warm bag. "I'm sure." Jonathan saw her shoulders relax for the first time since she had approached his table. "How long has your brother been ill?" he asked. Annie looked up. "Most of his life. He was born with kidney problems. Some months he does all right. Other months..." She stopped, unwilling to give the rest of the sentence to strangers. "Is he under a doctor's care?" "Yes, sir. At Street Catherine Medical Center. We have an appointment next week." David glanced at her. "Do you have transportation for appointments?" "We manage." Jonathan had begun to understand that when Annie said "we manage," she meant they had not yet been forced to give up entirely. The car turned onto South Ingleside Avenue and stopped in front of a 3-story brick apartment building. A light flickered above the front entrance. Salt had been scattered unevenly on the steps, and a plastic wreath hung on the glass door with one corner bent inward. Annie reached for the handle. "Thank you for the ride, sir. I can go in from here." Jonathan looked at the snow blowing across the sidewalk. "I will carry the bag." "That isn't necessary." "I know." She held his gaze for a second, then gave a small nod. David stayed near the car with the folder under his coat while Jonathan followed Annie up the steps. The hallway inside smelled faintly of laundry detergent and radiator heat. On the second floor, Annie stopped at a door with peeling paint around the frame. Before she could find her key, the door opened. A thin boy stood there in sweatpants and a faded Chicago Bears sweatshirt. One hand braced against the frame. He had Annie's eyes, but his face was pale and tired beneath a head of short curls. "Annie?" His gaze moved past her to Jonathan. "Who's that?" "I'm home," she said quickly. "You should be lying down. I heard a car." He gave her a suspicious look. "A very expensive car." Despite everything, Annie smiled. "This is Mr. Whyℎmore. He was at the restaurant tonight." Noah took in Jonathan's wool coat, polished shoes, and careful silence. "The owner? My wife owns the restaurant," Jonathan said. The words no longer sounded as harmless as they had earlier that evening. Annie unlocked the door fully and stepped inside. "Mr. Whyℎmore gave us some dinner." Noah's eyes moved to the bag in Jonathan's hand. Hunger crossed his face before he could hide it. "Thank you, sir," he said. Jonathan handed the bag to Annie. "You are welcome." The apartment was small, but not neglected. 2 coats hung from hooks by the door. School books were stacked in neat piles on a folding table. An old radio sat open on the coffee table with its back removed, wires arranged beside a small screwdriver. Near the sofa were a water bottle, a prescription bottle, and a printed hospital appointment reminder held down by a chipped coffee mug. Annie set the food on the table and removed the containers. Noah came closer, slower than a healthy boy should have moved at 15. "Sit down," she told him. "I've been sitting all day." "Then sit down again." He obeyed with a faint smile. Annie opened the container of fried chicken first, placing one piece on a plate for him. She added potatoes and greens, then slid the plate across the table. Noah stared at it. "What about you?" "I ate at work." He looked at her for a long moment, then picked up the piece of chicken and broke it carefully in half. "Here, Noah, eat your dinner. You don't lie very well when you're tired." He placed one half on the empty plate in front of her. "Eat with me." Annie glanced toward Jonathan, embarrassed, but he had already turned his attention to the radio on the coffee table, giving her the privacy of not being watched. Noah took a bite, his eyes closed for half a second. "This is really good." "It ought to be," Annie said, settling into the chair across from him. "Apparently it costs almost $40. Noah stopped chewing. "For chicken?" From the doorway, Jonathan heard David give a quiet laugh from the hall. "That was not meant to make it home with the meal," David called. Noah smiled, then coughed into his sleeve. Annie was beside him at once, reaching for the water bottle. The cough passed, but the speed of her reaction told Jonathan it was familiar. "You said your appointment is next week," he said. "Is that a routine visit?" Annie twisted the cap back onto the bottle. "It was supposed to be." "He's been weaker this week." "I'm fine." Noah said. You nearly fell going to the bathroom this afternoon. I got up too fast. She looked at him, and he dropped his gaze to his plate. Jonathan noticed an envelope on the counter marked Final Notice, half covered by a grocery receipt. Beside it lay Annie's work schedule, filled with late shifts. She had not been asking for luxury. She had been trying to keep heat in the apartment and medicine beside her brother's bed. He reached into his coat. Miss Brooks, I would like to help with your rent and Noah's medical costs until this payroll matter is settled. Annie set down her fork. No, sir. No. I need the wages I earned. And if other people were not paid, they need theirs too. She spoke respectfully. But there was no hesitation now. If you give me money tonight and everyone else keeps waiting, then I'm only lucky because you happen to leave food on your plate. Noah looked from his sister to Jonathan. She worked for that money, Mr. Whitmore. She shouldn't have to say thank you just to get back what belongs to her. The boy's voice was tired, not angry. That made the words harder to receive. Jonathan slowly returned his wallet to his coat. You are both right. Annie seemed surprised by the answer. He continued, your wages will be addressed, not as a favor, as an obligation, and I will find out why they were withheld. David appeared in the doorway, his phone in hand. John, Celeste has received your message. Her assistant says she is on her way to the restaurant now. Jonathan looked once more at Noah's medicine, the appointment notice, and the half piece of chicken on Annie's plate. Then I should be there when she arrives. Annie stood. Mr. Whitmore? He turned. Whatever she says, please don't let Mr. Pike punish the people who spoke tonight. Jonathan nodded. He will not. Outside, the snow had begun to cover the sedan's roof. As Jonathan descended the worn steps with David, he reached into his coat and touched the folded payroll list. 19 names. Behind one of them was a girl eating her first real food of the day beside a sick brother who had already learned the difference between charity and what a person was owed. Jonathan opened the car door. Back to the restaurant, he told the driver. David slid in beside him. Ready to hear your wife's explanation? Jonathan looked up at the single-lit window on the second floor, where Annie was pulling the second plate closer to Noah. No, he said, but I'm done allowing other people to pay for it. By the time Jonathan's car returned to Maison Celeste, the dinner crowd had thinned. The piano player was packing sheet music into a leather case, and a busboy was removing candles from tables where guests had left half-finished desserts and crumpled napkins behind. The warmth of the dining room no longer impressed Jonathan. He saw only the people cleaning it, moving quickly while 19 unpaid names sat folded inside his coat pocket. Gerald was waiting near the host stand. Mrs. Whitmore arrived 5 minutes ago, he said. She's in the private office. Jonathan did not slow. Good. Mr. Whitmore, she asked that I remain outside unless called. David gave Gerald a dry glance as they passed. For once tonight. That sounds like excellent advice. The office door was partly open. Celeste stood behind her desk, still wearing the silver evening gown she had chosen for the Lakeshore winter benefit. Her coat had been tossed over a chair, and her diamond earrings caught the light each time she moved. A champagne flute sat beside her handbag, though Jonathan could not imagine she had been in the office long enough to pour it herself. There you are, she said. Would someone please tell me why I was dragged away from a benefit in the middle of dinner? My assistant said you were making threats over a payroll delay. Jonathan closed the door behind David. 19 payroll delays. Celeste's expression tightened for only a second. Gerald should never have let this reach you at dinner. It's a cash timing issue. Restaurants have them. Annie Brooks has been waiting 2 weeks for her paycheck. Celeste removed one earring and placed it on the desk. I do not know every server's name, Jonathan. You should know the name of the girl who had to ask for 2 pieces of chicken from my plate because her sick brother had no dinner at home. Celeste stopped removing the second earring. David took a seat without being invited. That is the difficulty with payroll delays, Celeste. They sound harmless until you attach them to people. Her eyes shifted toward him. I was not aware this was a board meeting. No, David said. Board meetings usually come with better financial explanations. Jonathan pulled the folded list from his coat and set it on the desk. Why were these payments held? Celeste glanced at the page but did not pick it up. The restaurant had unexpected vendor obligations. We had to prioritize funds until a transfer cleared. From where? Jonathan, really? I am not going to be cross-examined in my own office because one employee made an emotional appeal to you. She did not make an appeal. She offered to work extra tonight and tomorrow, so the cost of my leftover food could be taken from wages she has not received. Celeste gave a short sigh. That is unfortunate. But you cannot allow staff to manipulate you every time they have a difficult home life. David's chair creaked as he leaned forward. Manipulate him? She asked permission to carry away food headed for the trash. Celeste ignored him. If she cannot afford to feed her family, perhaps she should have spoken to management through the proper channels. Jonathan's voice dropped. Employees told me tonight that when they asked about their wages, they were warned about losing shifts. That is Gerald's department. Gerald says the payroll was held pending your approval. For the first time, Celeste looked directly at the sheet. Her hand moved toward it, then stopped. I approve expenses, she said. That does not mean I personally handle every payroll transfer. Then you will have no objection to an independent audit. Her head lifted. An audit? Over $48,000? Jonathan stared at her. You already know the amount? The silence after his question was small, but it was enough. Celeste picked up her champagne flute, then changed her mind and set it down again. Gerald briefed me in the car. He told us accounting was closed and he had only a preliminary list. Then perhaps he was more prepared with me than he was with you. David stood. That should be easy to establish from call logs. Celeste turned to Jonathan. Why is he here? This is between husband and wife. No, Jonathan said. It stopped being only between us when people who work for you lost access to their own money. A knock came at the door. Gerald entered holding a printed page and a pen. Sir, I prepared the statement you requested. No employee who spoke tonight will face scheduling changes or discipline related to this matter. Jonathan took it and scanned the language. Add that all electronic and paper records connected to payroll, scheduling, vendor payments, and management instructions for the past 6 months are to be preserved immediately. Gerald glanced at Celeste. Jonathan caught it. Do not look at my wife. I gave you an instruction. Yes, sir. Celeste stepped around the desk. Enough. You are disrupting my business in front of my employees. I told you this will be corrected. When? Within days. That is not an answer. It is the answer I have. Jonathan thought of Annie sitting across from Noah, claiming she had already eaten until her brother broke his meal in half. He thought of the prescription bottle near the sofa and the final notice partly hidden beneath a grocery receipt. No, he said. The answer is that every employee listed here is paid by tomorrow morning. Celeste's eyes narrowed. From what account? If this restaurant cannot meet its payroll, I will advance the funds and document every dollar. Then I will find out why I had to. You are overreacting. I was underreacting when I believed this place was something to be proud of. Her face hardened. Be careful, Jonathan. You walked in here after one conversation with a frightened little waitress and decided you understand my business. She is not a little waitress. She is an employee your restaurant owes money to. Her name is Annie Brooks, and you will use it when you speak about her. David gave Jonathan a brief nod, almost imperceptible. Celeste folded her arms. Do whatever makes you feel righteous tonight. Tomorrow, when the emotion wears off, we can discuss this like adults. Jonathan turned to Gerald. Send the preservation notice tonight. Give my financial office access to payroll and operating accounts before midnight. If anyone alters a record or contacts an employee about what was said at my table, David will know. Gerald nodded, then left with the paper held close to his chest. Jonathan faced Celeste one last time. Annie said she did not want to cause trouble. I told her trouble may already be there. Celeste laughed once, without warmth. And now you think you are saving her? No, he said. I think I am finally asking why she needed saving from a place with my family's name on the door. He walked out with David behind him. In the quiet dining room, Maria was wiping down a table. Andre carried a tub of dishes toward the kitchen. Neither looked up, but Jonathan understood they were waiting to learn whether his anger would last longer than one evening. His phone vibrated before he reached the entrance. A message from his financial officer appeared on the screen. Payroll hold confirmed. Accessing transfers now. There are additional irregular withdrawals. I recommend immediate review. Jonathan read the message twice. David looked over his shoulder. What is it? Jonathan slipped the phone into his coat, his face no longer hot with anger, but settled into something colder. Whatever Celeste was trying to cover, he said, it is larger than 19 paychecks. Jonathan did not go home that night. At 11:45, the last guests left Maison Celeste under a sweep of umbrellas, their laughter fading as the front doors closed behind them. The dining room fell quiet except for the clatter of dishes in the kitchen and the scrape of chairs being moved for cleaning. Celeste had retreated to her office after their argument, refusing to speak further until Jonathan came to his senses. He had no intention of giving her the comfort of waiting. He sat at a corner table with David and a laptop belonging to Thomas Reed, the financial controller from Whyℹ Holdings. Thomas had arrived in a wool coat thrown over sweatpants, apologizing only once for his appearance before opening the restaurant's bank records. "You were right to call," Thomas said, scrolling through a ledger. "The payroll account was funded 12 days ago. There was enough to cover every outstanding check." Jonathan looked at the screen. "Then why wasn't anyone paid?" Thomas tapped several entries. "Because the money was moved. 3 transfers out of operations, all approved under the restaurant administrator's credentials." "Celeste's?" "Her office credentials. I need the underlying authorization before I say she initiated them personally." David leaned over the table. "Where did the money go?" "First to an account labeled Hospitality Consulting. From there, I can't see yet without a broader authorization or subpoena." Jonathan pushed back his chair. "Where are the approval records kept?" Thomas looked toward the offices. "There should be invoices, payment requests, something explaining why funds intended for payroll were rerouted." Gerald, who had been standing near the bar as if keeping his distance might protect him, answered before Jonathan asked him. "Mrs. Whyℹ keeps certain records in her private cabinet." Celeste's office door opened at once. "What records?" she asked. She had removed her evening gown jacket and changed into a cream cashmere wrap, but there was nothing relaxed in the way she held herself. Gerald seemed to shrink beneath her gaze. He spoke carefully. "The vendor files you instructed me not to access without approval." Celeste gave a faint laugh. "There are no secret vendor files. There are confidential business documents. Jonathan, you have made your point. Pay the employees if that helps you sleep, and let my accounting staff sort out the rest in the morning." Jonathan stood. "You moved money out of an account intended for payroll. I moved funds to keep this restaurant running. Then show us where they went. I will not have my husband and his friend rummaging through my office at midnight because a server gave you a sad story." David closed the laptop. "A server told him she had not been paid. Bank records now support her. At this point, the only person turning it into a story is you." Celeste's eyes flashed. "You have always enjoyed pretending you know what is best for Jonathan." "No," David said. "I only notice when someone else assumes he will not look closely." Jonathan stepped toward the office. "Open the cabinet, Celeste." She blocked the doorway. No, for a moment neither of them moved. The restaurant around them seemed to listen. From the kitchen entrance, Maria had stopped with a stack of folded linens in her arms. Andre stood near the service station, no longer pretending to polish silverware. Jonathan lowered his voice. 19 employees have been denied wages. One of them is 18 years old and went home tonight to feed her sick brother from the food I left on a plate. Do not tell me this is a private matter between you and your filing cabinet." Celeste looked past him at the staff. "Everyone still here is dismissed for the evening," she said. "Go home." No one moved. Maria swallowed, then said, "Mrs. Whyℹ, will our checks be paid tomorrow?" Celeste stiffened. "That is being handled." "That is what we were told last week," Andre said. Gerald snapped. "That is enough." Jonathan turned toward him. "No, it isn't." The front door opened behind them, letting in a rush of cold air. Annie stepped inside, still in her uniform and winter coat, her cheeks pink from the snow. Jonathan stared at her. "Miss Brooks, why are you back?" She held up a small black booklet. "I left my bus pass in my locker, sir. The driver was kind enough to bring me back before taking me home." Her eyes went to the gathering near the office. "Is everything all right?" Celeste looked at her as though she had appeared by design. "You," she said, "do you have any idea what you've started tonight?" Annie halted. The confidence she had shown while protecting Noah vanished under the direct force of Celeste's anger. "I only asked about food, ma'am. You brought a personal problem to a customer's table and embarrassed this restaurant." Jonathan moved between them. "Do not speak to her that way." Celeste laughed bitterly. "There it is. She has known you for one evening, and now you are defending her against your wife." Annie's fingers tightened around her bus pass. Mr. Whitmore, I can leave. I didn't mean to make things worse. David approached her, his voice calm. Annie, you did not withhold anyone's paycheck. You do not carry responsibility for people being asked questions about it. Jonathan looked at Celeste. Open the cabinet. She folded her arms. Speak to my attorney. Thomas cleared his throat from the table. Mr. Whitmore. Given the operating guarantee attached to Whitmore Holdings, we can freeze non-payroll expenditures pending review. Payroll can be released by morning from the reserve account. Celeste turned on him. You have no authority to touch my restaurant accounts. He does now, Jonathan said. I am authorizing it. For the first time, something close to fear crossed her face. You do that, she said quietly. And you will regret how public this becomes. Jonathan heard the threat, but Annie heard something else. She looked from Celeste to Gerald, then to the office behind them. Mr. Whitmore, she said, I don't know if this matters, but Mr. Pike told us never to put paycheck questions in writing. He said, Mrs. Whitmore wanted payroll concerns handled verbally. Maria nodded. He told me the same thing. Gerald's face drained. I was following procedure. Whose procedure? David asked. Gerald looked at Celeste before he could stop himself. Jonathan saw it. So did everyone else. Celeste stepped back into her office and shut the door. David took out his phone. I think tomorrow morning just became an evidence preservation matter. Jonathan turned to Thomas. Release the wages as soon as the banks open. Every employee. Full amount. Then begin a complete review of every transfer from this restaurant for the last year. Annie spoke softly. Sir, will that mean people get paid even if Mrs. Whitmore doesn't agree? Jonathan met her eyes. Yes, Miss Brooks. It means no one who worked here will be asked to wait for what already belongs to them. She nodded, unable to say more. Outside, his driver waited by the curb, engine running against the snow. Jonathan gestured toward the door. Go home to Noah. I will have someone return your bus pass tomorrow if you leave it again. A tired smile appeared on her face. I'll try not to, sir. As Annie left, clutching the pass in one hand and her coat closed with the other, Jonathan looked toward Celeste's closed office door. Somewhere behind it were records she would not show him and answers she was suddenly desperate to keep locked away. By morning, the employees would have their money. After that, he intended to find out what his wife had purchased with their hunger. Morning came without sunlight. A low gray sky pressed over Chicago, and the snow along the curb outside Maison Celeste had turned to slush beneath delivery trucks and early traffic. Annie stepped off the bus with her collar pulled high and checked her phone before crossing the street. Noah had sent a message 15 minutes earlier. Feeling better. Don't worry, and don't skip breakfast. She knew he had added the last part because he suspected she would. She typed back that she had eaten, then placed the phone in her pocket before the lie could feel any heavier. The restaurant was not open yet, but the side employee entrance was unlocked. Inside, the kitchen smelled of coffee, onions, and bread warming in the ovens. Usually, that smell made the first hour of her shift easier. This morning it reminded her of the paper bag she had carried home the night before, of Noah eating slowly at their small table, and of the way Mr. Whitmore had looked at the prescription bottle near the sofa. Maria was tying an apron around her waist near the prep station. You came in, she said, surprised. I'm scheduled. Maria lowered her voice. After last night, I thought you might stay away. Annie placed her coat in her locker. I can't afford to stay away. Maria touched her arm briefly. You did nothing wrong. Before Annie could answer, Gerald's voice came from behind them. Annie, my office. Now. Maria's hand fell away. Annie followed Gerald through the narrow corridor behind the kitchen. The office door was already open. On his desk lay a printed form, a pen placed squarely across it. He shut the door once she stepped inside. Sit down. I would rather stand, sir. His mouth tightened. This isn't a conversation you get to control. Annie folded her hands in front of her apron so he would not see them shake. What is this about? Gerald picked up the paper. Your conduct last night. Approaching a customer for food, discussing personal matters during service, creating disruption in the dining room, and involving other staff in an inappropriate conversation. Annie stared at him. I asked for food that was going to be thrown away. You embarrassed the restaurant. I embarrassed the restaurant because I said I had not been paid? Gerald paused. His face shifted from authority to warning. Be careful, Annie. You are 18 years old. You have no idea how quickly an employer can decide someone is not a good fit. The words made her stomach tighten. Noah's appointment reminder sat in her mind beside the rent notice and the empty refrigerator. She had feared this exact moment since she spoke at Jonathan's table. Gerald slid the paper toward her. You are suspended pending review. Sign at the bottom to confirm you received notice. She looked down. Will I still be paid what I'm owed? That is separate. Will I be scheduled next week? That depends on the review. Annie raised her eyes. You mean it depends on whether I keep quiet? Gerald leaned back in his chair. I mean, you need to understand your position. Mrs. Whyℎmore is a respected business owner. You are an hourly server who violated policy in front of important guests. Do not confuse Mr. Whyℎmore feeling sorry for you with protection. Annie felt the sting of it, but this time she did not look down. May I take a picture of the paper before I sign it? His expression hardened. No. This is an internal document. A knock sounded, and the door opened before Gerald could respond. David Mercer entered first, wearing a dark overcoat over yesterday's clothes and holding a paper coffee cup. Jonathan followed him, his expression controlled enough that Annie knew he was angrier than he had been the night before. Gerald stood too quickly. Mr. Whyℎmore, I was not told you were coming in. That seems to be a recurring problem here, David said. Things happen whenever no one thinks he is watching. Jonathan's attention moved from Annie to the paper on the desk. What is that? Gerald reached for it. Jonathan was faster. He picked it up and read the first paragraph. Annie heard the silence change. Jonathan looked up. You are suspending Miss Brooks? Temporarily. For conduct during service last night. After I instructed you, in front of witnesses, not to discipline or penalize any employee for discussing unpaid wages. This has nothing to do with wages. She solicited food from a guest. David gave a quiet, humorless laugh. An employee reveals that she has not received her pay. The next morning, you suspend her for the conversation in which it came out. That distinction will interest an investigator. Gerald's face reddened. I am enforcing policy. Jonathan placed the notice flat on the desk. Then show me the same policy being enforced against every employee who has ever spoken personally to a guest. Show me every suspension issued for accepting a leftover dessert, taking home a staff meal, or mentioning a family need during a shift. Gerald said nothing. Jonathan picked up the form, tore it once down the center, then again. Annie flinched at the sound. Miss Brooks is not suspended, he said. She will be paid for every scheduled hour. She will not lose a future shift because she told the truth. Gerald stared at the pieces of paper in the wastebasket. Mrs. Whyℎmore will not approve this. My wife is no longer the person you should be worried about approving your conduct. As if summoned by his words, Celeste appeared in the doorway. She wore a camel-colored coat over a fitted cream dress. Her hair arranged with the same precision she brought to every public appearance. Only the hard set of her mouth revealed that she had not slept well. What exactly are you doing in my manager's office? She asked. Jonathan turned, stopping him from retaliating against an employee you owe money to. Celeste's gaze landed on Annie. Of course this is about her again. Annie's face warmed, but she stayed where she was. Celeste stepped into the office. Annie, you created a disturbance in my dining room. If you had concerns about your paycheck, you should have brought them privately to management, not used a customer's table to make yourself a spectacle. I did ask about my paycheck, ma'am, Annie said. Her voice was soft, but it did not break. Mr. Pike told me it would come. I waited, and when waiting became inconvenient, you approached my husband. I approached a plate of food, Annie replied. I didn't know he was your husband until after I asked. David took a slow sip of coffee. That may be the most inconvenient part of this for you, Celeste. She was hungry before she knew anyone important was watching. Celeste glared at him. Stay out of my business. That would be easier if your business were paying its employees. Jonathan stepped between Celeste and Annie. The wages are being released this morning from the reserve account. 19 employees will receive what they are owed. After that, an independent review will determine why the funds were withheld. Celeste's expression changed. You cannot move money through my restaurant without my consent. I can when Whyℎmore Holdings guaranteed the operating reserve and the restaurant is failing to meet payroll. For one moment, Annie saw fear in Celeste's eyes. It disappeared almost immediately beneath anger. You are taking her word over mine. No, Jonathan said. I am taking payroll records over excuses. Maria appeared in the corridor, hesitant but unable to stay away. Andre stood behind her. Gerald looked at them and then at Celeste, suddenly aware that the office was no longer private enough for quiet threats. Jonathan turned to Annie. Do you want to work your scheduled shift today? The question startled her. She had expected to be told what would happen next, not asked. Yes, sir, she said. I need to work. Then you will, and you will be treated with respect while you do it. Annie nodded, pressing her lips together against the relief threatening to undo her. As she stepped past Celeste, the woman spoke without looking at her. This is not over. Annie stopped, then turned back. No, ma'am, she said quietly. I don't think it is. She walked toward the kitchen, where Maria held the door open for her. Jonathan remained in Gerald's office, facing the wife whose restaurant he had once admired from the dining room. Now he had seen the hallway behind it, the locked drawers, the unpaid names, and the paper meant to punish the first young woman desperate enough to be heard. His phone buzzed. Thomas Reed's message appeared on the screen. Payroll release initiated. Also found transfers from operations to an outside account. Need to speak immediately. Jonathan read it once, then looked at Celeste. Her face told him she already knew what Thomas was about to say. Jonathan did not take his eyes off Celeste when he answered Thomas's call. Tell me. Thomas's voice came through the phone, clipped and careful. The payroll release is moving forward. Employees should begin seeing deposits before noon. But the transfers I mentioned were not ordinary vendor payments. At least 3 were routed through an account called North Shore Hospitality Consulting. I can't find an active contract attached to it. Celeste reached for her handbag. I have an appointment. Jonathan blocked the office door without touching her. You have an explanation to give. I don't answer to your employee in front of waitstaff. Thomas continued through the phone. John, there's more. The withdrawals coincide with missed payroll dates. I need authorization to bring in forensic accounting. You have it. Celeste's head snapped toward him. Jonathan, stop this. He ended the call. You stopped paying people who work for you. Whatever comes next is not something I am doing to you. A crash sounded from the dining room. Annie had been carrying a tray of water glasses toward a table being prepared for lunch. Her phone was pressed to her ear, and the tray slipped from her hand when the voice on the other end rose in panic. Glass shattered across the tile, but Annie did not seem to hear it. Slow down, Mrs. Green, she said. What happened? Maria hurried to her side. Annie? Annie turned, her face drained of color. Noah collapsed. The room changed in an instant. Jonathan left Celeste standing in the office doorway and moved toward Annie. Where is he? Our apartment. Our neighbor found him on the kitchen floor. She called an ambulance, but she doesn't know which hospital they're taking him to. Annie was already pulling off her apron, her fingers unable to work the knot. I need to go. I need to get to him. I'll take you. I can catch the bus. No. Jonathan took his coat from the host stand. David, call Street Catherine. Find out whether an ambulance is bringing in Noah Brooks. David had his phone out before Jonathan finished speaking. Celeste followed them into the dining room. Jonathan, you cannot abandon this conversation every time that girl has a crisis. Annie stopped as though she had been struck. Jonathan turned so sharply that Celeste fell silent. Her brother is 15 years old and sick. Do not speak about him as an inconvenience to your mourning. I did not cause his illness. No, he said. But you may have held the wages his sister needed to care for him. Until I know otherwise, you will not say another word about that family in my presence. He guided Annie toward the front entrance without touching her. Maria placed Annie's coat around her shoulders as they passed. Go, Maria said. We'll cover the floor. Annie tried to answer, but only a broken breath came out. The car reached Street Catherine Medical Center 20 minutes later. David had confirmed Noah was in the emergency department before they were halfway there. Annie sat forward the entire drive, clutching her phone as Mrs. Green sent short updates. They took him in. He opened his eyes once. I'm here. Jonathan had made business calls in emergencies, had watched markets fall and negotiations unravel. None of those silences felt like the one inside that car. At the hospital entrance, Annie ran before the driver had fully opened the door. Jonathan and David followed at a distance, arriving at the admitting desk, just as a nurse directed her down the hall. Mrs. Green, A gray-haired woman in a quilted coat rose from a plastic chair when she saw Annie. "Baby, I found him beside the table," she said, pulling Annie into her arms. "He tried to stand up for water. He was awake when the ambulance took him." "Did he take his medicine?" "I don't know." "I'm sorry, honey. I don't know." A physician came through the emergency doors a few minutes later and asked for Noah's guardian. Annie raised her hand. "I'm his sister. I'm 18. It's just us." The doctor led her to a quieter corner. Jonathan heard only fragments at first. Dehydration, kidney condition, blood work, monitoring. Then Annie asked the question that mattered. "Is he going to be okay?" "He is stable right now," the physician said. "We're giving him fluids and running tests. His existing condition makes episodes like this more serious." "Has he missed any appointments recently?" Annie stared at the floor. "I moved one from last week to next week." "Why?" Her voice fell. "I was waiting for my paycheck." Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment. The doctor did not judge her. "We'll have a social worker speak with you. Right now, he's being cared for. You can sit with him soon." When Annie entered Noah's room, he looked too small beneath the white blanket. An IV line ran into his arm, and the monitor beside him kept time with soft electronic beeps. He opened his eyes when she sat beside him. "Hey," he whispered. Annie gripped his hand. "Do not hey me. You scared me half to death." "I didn't mean to." "I know." She brushed her thumb across his fingers. "I should have been home." "No." His voice was thin but firm. "You were working." Her mouth trembled. "I should have bought more groceries. I should have kept the appointment. I should have found another job when the check didn't come." Noah frowned, exhausted by the effort. "Annie, stop." She bent closer. "You already had a job," he said. "They just didn't pay you." Jonathan stood outside the half-open door with David. He had heard every word. His phone rang again. "Thomas." Jonathan stepped away from the room and answered. "Release every overdue paycheck immediately." "Already processing," Thomas said. "I need final approval for any additional reimbursement. Document whatever is lawful and owed. Review missed overtime, late payment consequences, and any lost scheduled hours. No confidentiality agreements. No one signs away a complaint to receive their own wages." David gave a small nod. Jonathan continued. "Set up an emergency assistance process through the Employee Benefits Office today. Medical and housing crises. Available to every eligible restaurant employee. Not only Miss Brooks." Thomas was silent for a second. "Understood." When Jonathan returned to the room, Annie's phone vibrated on the chair beside her. She picked it up, read the banking notification, and went still. "My pay," she whispered. It came through. Noah managed a tired smile. "Good." Jonathan stood near the doorway. "All 19 employees are being paid today." Annie looked at him, tears gathering now despite her effort to hold them back. "Thank you." He shook his head. "No, not for that. You earned every dollar." She glanced at her brother, then back at him. "The hospital bills. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. You will speak with the hospital social worker and with an employee assistance representative. Any help offered will be recorded, fair and available under the same rules to other employees facing emergencies." Annie studied him, making sure she understood. "You're not paying for Noah because you feel sorry for us? I am making certain a restaurant that failed its employees begins acting like it owes them more than an apology." For the first time since she entered the hospital, Annie let herself breathe. In the corridor, David's phone lit up with an incoming file from Thomas. He read the first page, then looked at Jonathan. "The outside account," he said quietly. "The transfers did not go to suppliers." Jonathan stepped away from Annie's room. "Where did they go?" David's expression hardened. "Payments tied to private gambling debt. Celeste's name is on the authorizations." Through the glass, Jonathan could see Annie still holding Noah's hand, her first paid wages in 2 weeks arriving only after her brother was lying in a hospital bed. He looked back at David. "Get me everything," he said. "This ends now." Jonathan left Street Catherine only after a nurse assured Annie that Noah would remain under observation through the night. Annie was still beside her brother's bed when he stepped into the elevator with David, one hand pressed against the folder David had printed from Thomas's files. Neither man spoke until the hospital doors closed behind them and the cold hit their faces. The driver opened the sedan, but Jonathan did not get in immediately. How certain are we? David held the folder under his coat to protect it from the snow. Certain enough to ask questions, not yet certain enough to accuse her publicly. Privately will do for tonight. They climbed into the back seat. David opened the folder beneath the overhead light. The payroll account was funded on schedule, he said. Celeste approved 3 transfers out before the checks were released. The money went first to North Shore Hospitality Consulting. That company has no staff, no current contract with the restaurant, and an address shared with a private financial intermediary. Jonathan stared at the page. A shell company? That is what it looks like. From there, the funds were split. 2 payments went to a casino debt collection service in Indiana. Another went to an attorney representing creditors connected to private gaming rooms. Thomas is still tracing the rest. How much? From payroll alone, $48,000. From the restaurant's operating funds over the last 6 months, nearly $700,000. Jonathan did not move. David turned another page. There are also cash withdrawals from a personal credit line secured against assets you jointly own. Large ones. How large? John, this is not one bad weekend at a casino. The city slid past the darkened window. Holiday lights hung above sidewalks. Shoppers hurried through snow carrying wrapped boxes. A father lifted a sleeping child from the back seat of a minivan. Jonathan remembered Celeste leaving for charity luncheons, benefit auctions, weekends with friends near Lake Michigan. He had trusted her because distrust would have required attention, and attention might have disrupted the life he believed they had built. She knew the account was payroll, he said. David did not soften the answer. Her authorization is on the transfers made before wages were due. She may claim she intended to replace the money, but she knew what she was moving. Jonathan thought of Annie's hands shaking as she pointed to 2 pieces of chicken. She knew enough. The Whitmore residence stood behind iron gates in Lincoln Park. Its windows lit against the snow. Celeste's car was already in the drive. Jonathan entered through the front door without removing his coat. He found her in the formal sitting room, seated on the edge of a velvet chair with a glass of white wine beside her. She looked at David behind him. Must he attend every argument in our marriage now? This is not an argument, Jonathan said. He laid the folder on the coffee table. It is an accounting of what you did. Celeste's eyes flicked to the pages, then back to him. I told you there were temporary transfers. You moved employee wages to pay gambling debt. Her fingers tightened around the stem of the wine glass. David said, The bank records are clear enough that denial will only waste time. Celeste stood. I don't owe you an explanation. You owe 19 employees an explanation, Jonathan said. Start with Annie Brooks. Do not bring that girl into my home. She is already in this home, Celeste. She is in every dollar you moved. She is in the hospital room where her brother is lying tonight. Celeste gave a hard laugh. And now that is my fault too? I did not make that boy sick. No. You only withheld the money his sister needed while she was trying to keep him fed and treated. I borrowed operating cash. That is all. The restaurant would have recovered, and everyone would have been paid. After how long? After someone lost an apartment? After a child got worse? After Annie offered to clean tables for food I was throwing away? Celeste turned toward the fireplace. You have always enjoyed playing the moral man once a problem becomes visible. The sentence struck, because there was truth buried inside the cruelty. Jonathan took off his gloves and placed them beside the folder. You are right about one thing. I should have been looking long before tonight. She turned back, startled by the admission, but that does not make what you did less deliberate. For a moment, her face changed. The practiced composure fell away, leaving anger and fear. You have no idea what I was dealing with, she said. People were calling me. They knew where I ate, where I shopped, which events I attended. I needed time. So you took it from the staff. I was going to put it back. With what money? She said nothing. David opened the folder to a marked page. There are outstanding debts beyond the restaurant transfers. If these figures are complete, you could not have replaced payroll without moving more funds or borrowing again. Celeste looked at Jonathan, her voice lower now. If this goes outside this room, it will not stop with me. The restaurant bears your family name. The credit lines connect to your holdings. Reporters will ask what kind of man lets his wife steal from young black employees while he sits on charitable boards. Jonathan held her gaze. They should ask. She stared at him. You would destroy us over a waitress you met last night? No, he said. You risked destroying us when you decided her wages mattered less than your debts. Celeste picked up her wine glass, then put it down without drinking. Pay them. I won't object. Then close the review. Their wages have already been released. She went still. You had no right. I had every obligation. Jonathan gathered the folder. David will preserve the records. Thomas will complete the audit. Until then, you are not to authorize a payment. Contact an employee about this investigation, or destroy a single document. Celeste's expression became cold again. You think Annie will thank you when this scandal follows her everywhere? You think people will see a poor young waitress beside a billionaire and assume she is innocent? David stepped forward, but Jonathan lifted a hand. That sounded less like concern for her than a threat. Celeste said nothing. Jonathan looked once around the room. At the paintings, the polished furniture, the framed photographs of charity galas where Celeste had smiled beside him, as though generosity were a family trait. Tonight, a girl asked for my leftovers because her paycheck never came, he said. I thought that was the worst thing I would learn about this house. He turned toward the door. Celeste called after him. Where are you going? Back to the hospital. Annie deserves to hear the truth from someone who is no longer hiding it. Outside, David followed him down the steps. Snow had covered Jonathan's footprints from when he entered only minutes earlier. She will not stay quiet, David said. Jonathan looked back at the lighted windows of his home. Neither will I. Jonathan returned to Street Catherine just after midnight. The hallway outside Noah's room had quieted, lit by dimmed ceiling panels and the blue glow of vending machines near the waiting area. Annie sat in a chair beside her brother's bed, still wearing her restaurant uniform beneath her coat. Noah was asleep now, one arm resting above the blanket, while the IV continued its slow drip. She stood when Jonathan appeared. Mr. Whyťmore? Is something wrong? He glanced at Noah, then nodded toward the corridor. May we speak outside for a moment? Annie tucked the blanket around her brother's shoulder before following him. David stood a few feet away with the folder under one arm, giving Jonathan space to speak first. The money that should have paid your wages was not lost in a banking delay, Jonathan said. It was transferred out of the restaurant account. Annie stared at him. Transferred where? To cover debts connected to my wife. Her brow tightened. Mrs. Whyťmore knew we weren't being paid? Yes. Annie looked through the glass panel in Noah's door. The boy slept, with his face turned toward the chair where she had been sitting. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. It was no longer embarrassed or apologetic. She knew people were waiting for rent money. Jonathan nodded. She knew I asked about my check. I believe she did. And she still let me work. David stepped closer. Annie, we are gathering records now. What Mr. Whyťmore is telling you is serious. But we will need proof that can stand outside a private conversation. She turned toward him. I have messages. What kind of messages? I texted Mr. Pike twice about my paycheck. Maria did too. He answered once, saying we should be patient and not create trouble during the holiday season. She pulled her phone from her pocket. I didn't delete anything. Keep them, David said. Do not forward them to anyone yet. I will arrange a secure copy in the morning. Annie nodded, then sank into a chair against the wall. I kept thinking I had done something wrong, she said, that maybe I should have saved more, or taken more shifts, or not bought Noah the better prescription refill when the cheaper one upset his stomach. She looked at Jonathan. She took our pay because she needed money for gambling? Jonathan had answered difficult questions across boardroom tables for most of his adult life. This one required only the truth, and he hated himself for being connected to it. Yes. Annie pressed a fist against her mouth, holding back tears until the first one escaped anyway. She wiped it away with the heel of her hand. I'm sorry, Jonathan said. She shook her head. Please don't apologize tonight. I don't know what to do with that yet. He accepted the rebuke. Then I will tell you what I can do. Your wages have been paid. Noah's immediate care will be addressed through an employee assistance process available to other workers facing emergencies. And my wife will no longer control payroll while this is investigated. Annie looked at him closely. Will she be able to fire me? No. Will she be able to fire Maria or Andre because they talked? No, David added, and if anyone tries, they will be making our evidence stronger. That brought no smile from Annie, but it seemed to let her breathe more evenly. By morning, Noah was awake and complaining about the hospital oatmeal. Annie had taken 2 bites of toast from the cafeteria when her phone began vibrating on the tray table. 1 message became 4, then 11. Maria's text appeared first. Don't open any links alone. Someone posted about you. Annie felt cold before she understood why. She tapped the link. The article came from a local gossip site she had never read. It did not use her full name, but it did not need to. It described a young restaurant server who had approached billionaire Jonathan Whitmore during dinner, claimed a family emergency, and received personal assistance after creating a scene at his wife's restaurant. The article suggested Jonathan's involvement had become unusually personal. Below it, comments had already multiplied. Some called her dishonest. Some claimed girls like her knew how to find rich men. Others used words she closed the screen before finishing. Noah noticed her face. What happened? Nothing. Annie. She handed him the phone because she could not bear to say it aloud. He read slowly, his tired expression hardening. They're lying. It doesn't matter if people believe them. She stood and began gathering her coat. I'll resign. If I step away, maybe this stops. Noah pushed himself higher against the pillow. Stops for who? For you, for me, for everyone. No, he said. His voice was weak, but certain. It stops for her. She gets to take your pay, call you a liar, and keep the restaurant. Annie stared at him. If you quit because she lied, Noah said, then her lie gets your job, your paycheck, and your name. The room fell quiet except for the monitor. Annie sat down again. For 18 years, survival had meant keeping her head low and getting through the next bill, the next shift, the next bad day. But Noah was right. Silence had not protected them. It had only made them easier to ignore. She opened her phone and began saving every message from Gerald, every schedule screenshot, every notice about delayed wages. Then she called Jonathan. I want to help prove it, she said when he answered. Not only for me, for everyone she thought would be too afraid to speak. That afternoon, David met her in a hospital conference room and copied the messages. Before he finished, his own phone rang. He listened for less than a minute, then looked at Jonathan. It's Gerald. He says Celeste is preparing to blame the payroll decisions on him. He wants protection in exchange for emails, instructions, and records. Jonathan's expression did not change. Tell him cooperation is not innocence. I already did. He still wants to meet. The meeting took place after dark in David's office. Gerald arrived carrying a flash drive and a thick envelope. Inside were printed emails from Celeste ordering him to delay checks, avoid written responses to employees, and find a clean reason to remove Annie from the schedule. There's more, Gerald said, wiping sweat from his upper lip. Mrs. Whitmore is hosting the Christmas reception tomorrow night. She told me several older accounting files are being cleared out afterward. Cleared out how? Jonathan asked. Gerald looked down. She said no one could investigate papers that no longer existed. The next evening, Annie returned to Maison Celeste to collect her locker contents and provide David with a signed copy of her schedule. The restaurant was dressed for the reception, silver ribbon around the railings and champagne arranged beneath white lights. As she passed the private office, she smelled smoke. The door was partly open. Inside, Celeste stood before the decorative fireplace, dropping payroll folders into the flames one by one. Annie stopped breathing for a second. Then she reached for her phone, pressed record, and stepped closer to the door. Annie held her phone at her side, angled through the opening in the office door. On the screen, Celeste lifted another payroll folder from the desk, tore it in half, and pushed it into the flames with a brass poker. The fire caught along the edges first, then swallowed the pages until the names and numbers curled into black ash. Behind Annie, the Christmas reception continued in the dining room. Guests laughed beneath strings of white lights, while a server passed with glasses of champagne. No one seemed to notice the smell of burning paper mixing with roast beef and pine garlands. Annie's thumb moved across the screen. She sent the video to David before she could change her mind. The message showed as delivered. You may as well come in. Celeste's voice made Annie's breath catch. The woman did not turn from the fireplace. She reached for another folder. Her movements calm now. Almost bored, Annie pushed the door open. "You're destroying payroll records." Celeste glanced over her shoulder. She wore a fitted silver dress and a diamond bracelet that caught the firelight when she raised the folder. "I am clearing outdated files from my office. Mr. Mercer said those records had to be preserved." Celeste smiled faintly. "Mr. Mercer says many things. He is not the owner of this restaurant." Annie kept the phone in her hand. "Mr. Whitmore already knows the wages were taken." "Your wages were paid, weren't they?" "That doesn't make what happened disappear." Celeste finally faced her. "You have received your money. Your brother is being treated. My husband has decided to make you his personal cause. Most girls in your situation would have enough sense to be grateful." Annie felt the old instinct rise in her, the one that told her to apologize, leave quickly, protect whatever little she still had. Then she remembered Noah in the hospital bed saying her silence would leave Celeste with her job, her pay, and her name. "I was grateful to be paid for work I already did," Annie said. "I'm not grateful that I had to beg for food before anyone cared enough to ask why." Celeste's mouth tightened. "You came into my restaurant, approached my husband, and created a scene in front of my customers. I asked for 2 pieces of chicken, and look what followed." Celeste gestured toward the office, the dining room, the world outside it. "An investigation, gossip, my marriage being dragged into your problems." Annie looked at the burning folders. "Your problems were here before I ever walked to his table." For a second, Celeste seemed almost surprised. Then she stepped closer. "Do you honestly believe people in this city will choose the word of a broke black waitress over mine?" The words settled between them. Annie's hand trembled around the phone, but she did not lower it. "Maybe they wouldn't have before," she said, "but now they won't have only my word." Celeste's eyes dropped to the phone. "What did you do?" Annie stepped back, but Celeste moved faster. She seized Annie's wrist and snatched the phone from her hand. "Give that back." Celeste checked the screen. When she saw the recording and the sent message, her composure broke. "You stupid girl." She crossed to the desk, opened a drawer, and threw Annie's phone inside, locking it with a small key. Annie moved toward the door, but Celeste reached it first and shut it. "You will stay here until I decide how to handle this." Annie's pulse pounded in her ears. "You cannot lock me in your office. I can prevent an employee from causing a disturbance at a private event. I'm not your employee anymore if this is what the job means." Celeste gave a short laugh. "You think Jonathan is going to protect you forever? Men like him enjoy rescuing people until it costs too much. When the press starts asking why he destroyed his marriage for an 18-year-old waitress, he will remember which life matters more." A knock struck the door, hard enough to rattle the handle. "Celeste, open this door." "Jonathan." Annie released the breath she had been holding. Celeste did not move. A second voice followed. "I have the video, Celeste," David called. "And if this door stays locked another 10 seconds, I will add unlawful restraint to the list of concerns your attorney will be discussing tonight." Celeste turned the key with a sharp motion and pulled the door open. Jonathan stepped inside first. His eyes moved from Annie to the locked desk drawer, then to the folders burning in the fireplace. "Are you all right?" he asked Annie. She nodded, though her hands were still shaking. "She took my phone." David walked to the desk. "The phone can be recovered. The video is already backed up." Celeste looked at Jonathan. "This has gone far enough. She came into my private office and recorded me without permission." Jonathan went to the fireplace and used the poker to drag out what remained of one folder. The corner still visible carried the printed words "Payroll Disbursement Records." "You were burning evidence. I was destroying old copies. Everything important is stored digitally. Then why lock Annie in here after she recorded you?" Celeste's face changed. "Because she is ruining my life, Jonathan. She already got her money. What more does she want?" Annie answered before he could. "I want the people you hurt to know they weren't wrong for needing their pay." Celeste turned on her. "You don't belong in this conversation." Jonathan stepped between them. "She belongs in it more than either of us. She is one of the people whose wages paid for your lies." Celeste stared at him. "You're choosing her over your wife?" "No," Jonathan said. "I'm choosing the truth over the woman who stole food, rent, and medicine from people who worked for her." The reception beyond the office had begun to quiet. Several guests stood close enough to have heard the raised voices. Gerald appeared at the edge of the doorway, then stopped When David looked at him, Celeste lowered her voice. Think carefully. If you make this public, your name goes down with mine. End this tonight. Pay whatever is owed. I will step away from the restaurant. I will get treatment. We can protect the family, and we can make sure Annie's brother receives whatever care he needs. Jonathan looked toward Annie. For a moment, she saw the fear behind his anger. Not fear for Celeste, but for everything the truth might drag through the open. Annie spoke softly. Mr. Whitmore, my brother should not have to be the price of keeping this secret. David picked up the half-burned folder with a cloth napkin and placed it on the desk. Jonathan turned back to Celeste. There will be no quiet agreement, he said. Not this time. Outside the office, the pianist had stopped playing. For the first time since Annie began working at Maison Celeste, the dining room was silent enough for everyone to hear the truth arrive. By 8 the next morning, a printed notice hung inside the locked front doors of Maison Celeste. Closed for private staff meeting. No lunch reservations would be honored. No holiday reception would continue. The dining room had been cleared of champagne trays and gift arrangements, but silver ribbons still wound around the staircase, left over from the party that had ended with smoke rising from Celeste's office. Annie arrived by bus after spending the night in a chair beside Noah's hospital bed. He had insisted she go. They need to see you standing there, he had told her, not hiding because she tried to make you ashamed. Now she stood just inside the restaurant entrance wearing her winter coat over a plain sweater and dark jeans. She was not scheduled to work. For the first time, she had entered Maison Celeste without an apron, a tray, or someone waiting to tell her where to stand. Maria approached and hugged her carefully. How is Noah? Stable. He complained about breakfast. So I think that's a good sign. Maria smiled, then glanced toward the front of the dining room. Everyone came, even the people who weren't scheduled. Annie followed her gaze. Cooks, bussers, dishwashers, bartenders, and servers filled the tables that usually belonged to paying guests. Andre sat near the bar with both hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup. Denise, the server Gerald had mentioned when talking about daycare, had brought her little boy because she had no one to watch him that morning. Jonathan stood beside David near the piano. He had removed his overcoat, but he still looked like a man who had not slept. Gerald sat alone at a table near the kitchen door, his eyes fixed on the floor. Celeste entered last with an attorney beside her. The room became quiet. She wore a dark suit instead of a gown, and her hair was pulled back with severe care. For a moment, she looked less like the woman Annie had faced in the office and more like the public figure whose photograph appeared in charity brochures. Jonathan stepped forward. Thank you for coming, he began. His voice carried easily in the room, but it lacked the confidence of someone giving a speech he enjoyed. Some of you came because you were asked. Some because you heard what happened last night. All of you deserve to hear the truth directly. Celeste's attorney shifted in his chair. Mr. Whitmore, my client has not agreed to any public allegations. This is a staff meeting in a restaurant where staff were denied wages, David said. You are welcome to listen. Jonathan held a folder in both hands. 19 employees of this restaurant worked scheduled hours and were not paid on time. Those wages were withheld while funds from the operating account were moved elsewhere. As of yesterday, overdue wages have been released. Any missing overtime, reduced shifts, or financial losses connected to those delayed payments will be reviewed by independent counsel. A murmur passed through the room. Annie heard Maria release a breath beside her. Jonathan continued. I did not know this was happening soon enough. That is not a defense. This restaurant operated with money and support connected to my family, and I accepted its success without asking enough questions about the people who made that success possible. Celeste rose. Jonathan, this is unnecessary. The employees have been paid. No one benefits from you turning a temporary financial matter into a public confession. A cook near the rear gave a disbelieving laugh. Jonathan turned toward her. Temporary for whom? Celeste's expression hardened. For the business. Every restaurant faces cash pressures. Maria stood from her chair. My landlord doesn't accept cash pressure instead of rent. Mrs. Whitmore. Andre rose beside her. I borrowed money from my father to get to work here while I was waiting to be paid for coming to work here. Denise lifted her sleeping son higher against her shoulder. I paid a late fee on daycare because my check did not arrive. Celeste looked around the room, surprised by voices she had never expected to hear raised in her direction. Then her eyes found Annie. This began with you, she said. Jonathan stepped forward. Do not. But Annie lifted one hand slightly. She did not want him answering for her now. Celeste gave a bitter smile. You walked to my husband's table, asked for food, told him your family problems, and suddenly he is prepared to tear apart a business and a marriage. You received your money. Your brother is receiving help. Was that still not enough? Annie felt every face turn toward her. Her legs wanted to move backward. Instead, she remembered Noah's hand beneath hers in the hospital, and the way he had said your name. She walked to the front of the room. I did not know Mr. Whitmore was your husband when I asked for those 2 pieces of chicken, she said. I saw food that had not been touched, and I thought my brother could eat it. That is all. Her voice shook once. She continued anyway. I was hungry that night too. I had worked my shift, and I still could not afford to bring home dinner because my paycheck had not come. I was embarrassed to ask. I was more embarrassed when Mr. Pike made it sound like needing food meant I had done something wrong. Gerald looked down. Annie turned toward the employees seated before her. I am not the only person who waited for money. I am not the only person who was afraid that asking would cost hours or a job. Mrs. Whitmore says we have been paid now. As if that ends it. But none of us should have had to beg, borrow, or go without while money we earned was being used for something else. Celeste's attorney stood. That is an unproven allegation. David opened a laptop on the nearest table. Not anymore. He displayed copies of authorized transfers from the payroll account, Celeste's emails instructing Gerald to hold disbursements, messages directing him to find a reason to remove Annie from the schedule, and still frames from the video of Celeste feeding payroll files into the fireplace. Gerald rose slowly. She told me to delay the checks, he said, his voice uneven. She said the funds would be replaced before anyone could make trouble. When Annie spoke to Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Whitmore told me to get her off the schedule. Celeste stared at him. You pathetic coward. No, Jonathan said. He was a coward when he obeyed you. Today he is only admitting it. Celeste turned toward Jonathan. You are letting this girl ruin everything we built. Jonathan shook his head. Annie did not destroy you, Celeste. She asked for 2 pieces of chicken. May reasoned she needed them. Exposed what you had already become. No one spoke. Jonathan placed another document on the table. Effective immediately. Celeste Whitmore is removed from all operational authority at this restaurant. Financial records and last night's evidence are being submitted to the appropriate investigators. My attorneys will also begin divorce proceedings today. Celeste looked at him as though the word had struck her physically. You would end our marriage in front of these people? Jonathan's voice remained low. These people paid the price for choices made inside our marriage. They deserve to hear that those choices will not be protected any longer. Celeste gathered her purse and turned toward the exit. No one moved to clear a path. They simply watched as she walked between the tables she had once ruled from a distance. When the doors closed behind her, the room stayed silent. Then Maria reached for Annie's hand. Jonathan approached them, stopping a respectful distance away. Miss Brooks, I am sorry you had to be the person who made me see this. Annie looked at him, exhausted but steady. An apology matters, sir, she said. What you do after it matters more. Jonathan nodded. Yes, he said, it does. Outside, snow fell quietly over the sidewalk. Inside, for the first time in the history of Maison Celeste, the people who had carried the plates were no longer standing at the edges of the room. 3 weeks later, the sign above the restaurant still read Maison Celeste, but her name no longer appeared on schedules, invoices, or office doors. The investigation had moved beyond Jonathan's attorneys to state officials reviewing wage violations, diverted funds, and the records Celeste had attempted to burn. Her lawyer released one statement blaming addiction and poor judgment. Jonathan did not respond publicly. He filed for divorce, surrendered every document his auditors uncovered, and instructed David to make certain no employee was asked to exchange silence for compensation. Gerald Pike resigned before he could be dismissed. His cooperation mattered, David told the staff, but it did not erase what he had done. Maria put it more simply, while folding napkins one afternoon. He knew people were hurting, she said. He kept carrying out orders anyway. Annie understood that better than she wished she did. For a long time, she had believed good people were simply people who had not caused the harm. Now she knew looking away, could leave the same bruise. Noah came home from Street Catherine 2 days before Christmas. He was thinner, annoyed by the diet sheet the hospital sent with him, and relieved to be back near his radio parts. Annie placed his medicine in labeled containers on the kitchen counter, lined up his appointment cards, and checked the refrigerator 3 times before she allowed herself to sit down. There was food inside now. Not luxury, just enough. Eggs, chicken soup, vegetables, fruit, milk, and the low-sodium meals the hospital nutritionist had recommended. Her overdue wages had covered the rent and groceries. The employee emergency program Jonathan established helped with the portion of Noah's medical care that Annie could not manage alone. The paperwork was handled through the same office made available to every employee, exactly as Jonathan had promised. On Noah's first evening home, someone knocked at their door. Annie opened it to find Jonathan standing in the hallway with a medium-sized cardboard box under one arm. He wore no expensive overcoat this time, only a dark wool jacket flecked with snow. "Mr. Whyℎmore, I hope I'm not interrupting." Noah called from the sofa. "Depends what's in the box." Jonathan smiled and stepped inside when Annie moved aside. He set the box on the small table. Inside was a radio building kit, more modern than Noah's broken one but designed to be assembled piece by piece. Noah sat forward. "You got this for me? I was told you like fixing radios." "I like trying to fix radios," Noah said. "There's a difference." Jonathan nodded. "Then this seems safer than giving you one already finished." Noah ran his fingers over the box, pleased despite his attempt to look grown-up. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Annie brought Jonathan a glass of water because offering him something felt better than letting him stand there surrounded by the things he now knew they had once gone without. "How is the restaurant?" she asked. "Open, though quieter than it should be. Some people are waiting to see whether anything really changes." "They should. I agree." He looked down at the glass in his hands. "David is helping establish an outside payroll service and a reporting line that does not run through management. No employee will have to ask the person withholding a check why it did not arrive." Noah looked up from the radio kit. "Are you still going to eat there?" Jonathan gave a tired half smile. "When I'm welcome. You should order less food this time." Annie sighed. Noah, "What? It's good advice." Jonathan looked at the boy, then toward Annie. "He's right. Waste costs more than people notice." The words remained in the apartment after he left. By spring, Annie was working regular shifts again. At first, every entrance into the restaurant brought back the weight of that white plate in her hands, and Gerald's voice telling her to step away. Then other sounds began replacing it. Maria laughing in the kitchen, Andre showing her his first full paycheck after receiving a promotion, customers complimenting the food without knowing what had once been hidden behind the polished doors. Jonathan placed the restaurant under professional management and formed an employee advisory committee. Annie declined a position on it at first. "I'm only 18, she told Maria. Maria folded her arms. "You were 18 when you stood in front of everyone and said what the rest of us were scared to say." Annie accepted after that. Jonathan also established a scholarship fund for employees pursuing college or vocational training. He did not offer Annie a private arrangement. She completed the application herself, wrote an essay about caring for Noah and wanting to study social work, and was selected by an independent review panel. When the acceptance letter arrived, Noah insisted on taping it above the radio he had finished building. "So you can't change your mind," he told her. "I wasn't going to. You change your mind every time something costs money." She laughed, then hugged him carefully. 1 year after the night Annie approached Jonathan's table, winter returned to Chicago. Snow softened the sidewalk outside the restaurant, but the old gold lettering was gone. Above the doors, a new sign read, "The Open Table." Inside, no tables were roped off for important guests. The dining room was full of neighborhood families, former staff, hospital workers, and regular customers. A holiday dinner was being served to celebrate the first year under the restaurant's new name. Jonathan sat with David near the window. David looked at the menu and shook his head. "You kept the chicken." Jonathan glanced toward the kitchen. Some things deserved a better history. Annie approached their table carrying a small takeout box. Her uniform had been replaced by a simple navy dress, and a college identification card hung from her purse. Noah sat across the room with Maria's son, explaining the parts of a portable radio, as though he had invented broadcasting himself. Annie set the box between Jonathan and David. Jonathan opened it, Inside were 2 pieces of fried chicken with rosemary honey glaze. He looked up at her. "What is this?" "One for you," she said, "and one for Mr. Mercer. You both stayed later than everyone else setting up chairs." David reached for his piece. "At last, recognition for my service." Jonathan laughed quietly, then looked toward Noah. "You don't need to take these home for your brother?" Annie followed his gaze. Noah had a full plate in front of him and was laughing at something Maria said. "No, sir," Annie replied. "Tonight, he already has his plate." She paused, then smiled. "And so do I." Jonathan looked down at the chicken. A year earlier, she had stood before him afraid to ask for food he had been willing to waste. He had thought generosity meant giving her the meal. It had taken far longer to understand that what she needed most was not his generosity, but the return of what had been stolen from her. "Miss Brooks," he said, "thank you." Annie tilted her head. "For the chicken? For not letting me look away?" She considered his words, then nodded once. "Just don't forget again." "I won't." She moved on to greet another table, and Jonathan watched her go without pity. She was no longer the frightened young woman waiting for permission beside his unfinished plate. She was a sister, a student, and a worker whose voice had changed the room simply because she had refused to let shame silence the truth. David lifted his piece of chicken. "Are you going to eat yours this time?" Jonathan picked it up. "Yes," he said, "every bite." This story reminds us that dignity should never depend on wealth, race, or social position. Annie was not asking for pity. She was asking for the wages, respect, and fairness she had already earned. Jonathan learned that kindness is not enough when injustice is allowed to continue in silence. True compassion means listening to those who are overlooked, standing against wrongdoing even when it comes from someone close to us, and making sure no hard-working person must beg for what rightfully belongs to them. Sometimes justice begins with a small question, 2 untouched pieces of chicken, and one person finally willing to see the truth. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.